Inside of the Tower of London, in the corner of Tower Green, the infamous site where Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, and many more lost their heads, can be found a small and beautiful chapel. The Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula, or St Peter in Chains, is found within the walls of the tower, and it dates back from the Tudor period in its current form today. But a church has been inside of the tower since the time it was built. But this chapel and small church is incredibly different, as under the stones where you walk are the remains of some of the most famous and notorious figures of the Tudor period. It today is the place where Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, Lady Jane Grey, Sir Thomas More, and many more are laid to rest. But what is the story of the church where queens are literally buried under your feet? Welcome to Learn With Me, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The original foundation for the Church of St Peter ad Vincula isn't known, and it has been rebuilt and knocked down a number of times. It's believed by some historians that it was founded before the Norman Conquest, and was a parish church, meaning that the original church would have been older than the Tower of London, and the oldest parts such as the White Tower. But other historians believe it was founded by Henry VIII around August 1110, and to begin with the church would have been outside the original walls of the tower, but as time has gone on the fortification has grown in its size with new walls and towers added. The chapel was outside the tower's walls so that the king could attend church and could be seen by the public praying and attending church services. Inside the White Tower, the oldest part of the fortress, there is another chapel called St John's Chapel, which was established by William the Conqueror when he created the fortress. But this was intended to have been a private chapel, where the king could receive services in private. Seeing a king worshipping in public was a powerful thing for someone to see, and it's believed that during the 13th century, in the reign of Henry III, that the crypt under the chapel for burials was built, and it's within here that hundreds of people, many victims of infamous monarchs such as Henry VIII, would be buried. In terms of the chapel design, it's a beautiful place to visit today, and it did have a significant amount of restoration work done to it during the Victorian period. Today the chapel is a regimental church of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, who are linked to the tower and have been for centuries. But the existing building as it stands today was rebuilt for Henry VIII by a lieutenant of the tower, Sir Richard Cholmondeley, and he is buried inside of the church today with his tomb in the centre. A fire did break out in 1512 and destroyed the church, but within 8 years the new one was ready for use. Inside are a number of beautiful tombs and memorials to people who have had close links to the tower, such as John Holland, the Duke of Exeter, who was a constable in the 15th century. There is also a monument to Sir Richard Blount and his son Michael, who both were lieutenants of the tower in the Tudor period, and they would have been tasked with organising many of the executions that occurred, and they would have been involved in organising the imprisonment of many key figures. But the Chapel of St Peter ad Vincula is visited by hundreds of thousands of people each year, for the fact it's a burial place of some of the most famous prisoners inside the Tower of London. In particular, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, two of the wives of Henry VIII who were executed, being beheaded nearby on a scaffold yards away, are buried inside the chapel. The incredibly high-profile burials are marked today below the altar and the communion table, and some who lie to rest next to the queens of Henry VIII are Lady Jane Grey, the 9-day Queen, who was also executed on the orders of Mary I. Her husband Guildford Dudley is also buried there, as is the brother of Anne Boleyn, George, who was executed alongside his sister after being accused of treason, incest and adultery with the Queen. Today it's believed George is a victim of the King's wrath and Cromwell's lies, but today he lies at rest close to his sister. Many of these burials are marked at the front of the chapel under the altar, and other significant figures such as Margaret Pole, the Countess of Salisbury, are buried there. Also buried is Jane Boleyn, who was executed being involved in the scandal with Catherine Howard, but the person laying beneath the altar is the Duke of Monmouth, James Scott, the illegitimate son of Charles II, who wanted to become king in his own right. Even poets and other significant figures are buried there, with Thomas Overbury, who was murdered in the Tower, buried beneath the altar, as was Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, who was executed during the reign of Elizabeth I. But as mentioned, there is a crypt inside of the chapel, where many more people are laid to rest. When renovation was carried out there, 1,500 people's remains were found, either in the crypt or under the floor. Interred within the crypts today are figures such as Sir Thomas More and Bishop John Fisher, who were both executed by Henry VIII for refusing to accept his changes to the church, and Anne Boleyn as the rightful queen. They lost their heads despite being close to the king, and another who fell spectacularly from grace was Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief advisor. Despite him making Henry VIII incredibly wealthy after he dissolved the monasteries, he too would upset the king and would lose his head at Tower Hill. Also executed on Tower Hill was Thomas Seymour, the uncle of Edward VI, who allegedly tried to abduct the boy king. There are many more people's bones interred inside the crypt, including people who were living nearby. For example, when Anne Boleyn's remains were discovered in the Victorian period, it was found they had been disturbed by the burial of another woman. The chapel of St. Peter at Vincula was described as, "In truth there is no sadder spot on the earth than that little cemetery. Death is there associated, not, as in Westminster Abbey and St. Paul's, with genius and virtue, with public veneration, and with imperishable renown, not, as in our humblest church and churchyards, with everything that is most endearing in social and domestic charities, but with whatever is darkness in human nature and in human destiny, with the savage triumph of enemies, with the inconstancy, the ingratitude, the cowardice of friends, with all the miseries of fallen greatness and blighted fame. Thither have been carried, through successive ages, by the rude hands of jailers, without one mourner following, the bleeding relics of men who had been the captains of armies, the leaders of parties, the oracles of senates, and the ornaments of court." But today it's a chapel royal, a church that would serve the spiritual needs of the king and the royal family. But the Tower of London isn't used anymore as a royal residence, and it's unlikely that only on special occasions would the king and the monarchy ever attend a church service there. But it's a church that is linked to the bloody reputation of the Tower of London, and it is where some of the most infamous and notorious victims would be finally laid to rest, a stone's throw away from where they lost their heads. Thanks for watching. As always, to support Learn With Me, please make sure to subscribe. And once again, thank you so much for watching.